Some of us were born to succeed, and some of us were born to watch, my cousin Victoria said at the family reunion, her voice carrying across the backyard with the casual cruelty of someone who never faced consequences for her words. It's not an insult, it's just reality. Some people have the drive, the vision, the natural talent for achievement. Others. She gestured vaguely in my direction as I refilled the potato salad bowl, provide support. Her friends from the country club laughed appreciatively while family members looked away in discomfort, and I absorbed the humiliation like I'd absorbed every slight for the previous 23 years. But why did I smile instead of cry, and why, 5 years later, did Victoria start sobbing uncontrollably when I walked into a conference room wearing a suit that cost more than her monthly car payment? I'll be representing the plaintiffs in this matter, I said, setting my briefcase on the table and meeting her eyes for the first time since that reunion. Good morning, Victoria. It's been a while. Her face went through recognition, confusion, disbelief, and finally dawning horror as she processed what my presence meant. That's impossible, she whispered. You serve potato salad, you can't be lead counsel for a class action lawsuit against your hotel chain? I assure you, I very much can be. I opened my briefcase and removed the complaint. Shall we begin, or do you need a moment? She needed more than a moment. She needed tissues, water, and 15 minutes of her own attorneys attempting to calm her down while I waited patiently, savoring every second of a reversal 5 years in the making. The family hierarchy had been established long before I was born. My mother was the youngest of 4 siblings, and the only one who'd married down, a construction worker instead of a professional, a man who worked with his hands instead of his head. Her siblings had married doctors, lawyers, business executives. They'd built wealth, moved to better neighborhoods, sent their children to private schools. We'd stayed in the same small house where I'd grown up. Public schools. Secondhand clothes. Vacations that meant camping instead of cruises. Victoria was my Aunt Margaret's daughter, the crown princess of the family hierarchy. Beautiful, polished, educated at institutions I couldn't have afforded to tour. She'd inherited her mother's social climbing instincts and her father's business acumen, launching a boutique hotel chain in her 20s that had made her wealthy in her own right. I was the scholarship kid who'd clawed my way into a state university, then a mid-tier law school, then a series of jobs that gradually built towards something better. Victoria had never let me forget the difference. The reunion comment had been her cruelest, but not her first. Throughout our childhood, she'd established the dynamic. She was the star, I was the audience. Family gatherings meant watching her receive praise while I blended into the background. Holiday dinners meant hearing about her achievements while no one asked about mine. Some of us were born to succeed. She'd said it while wearing a designer dress that cost more than my monthly salary as a first-year associate at a small firm. She'd said it while I carried serving dishes because helping with the food was how the poor relatives contributed. I'd smiled because crying would have given her satisfaction. I'd kept serving because walking away would have hurt my mother more than Victoria's words hurt me. But I'd also made a silent promise that night, someday, the dynamic would change. Law school had been brutal for someone with my background. My classmates came from families who could support them financially, who had connections in the legal world, who understood the unwritten rules of professional advancement. I came from a family where I was the first college graduate, let alone lawyer. I worked part-time throughout school, something my professors discouraged but my bank account required. I networked clumsily, lacking the social polish that came naturally to students who'd grown up attending the right events. I graduated middle of my class, good enough to pass the bar but not good enough to attract the prestigious firms. The first years of practice were worse. I took cases no one wanted, small claims, minor disputes, clients who could barely pay. I learned litigation the hard way, through mistakes that more supervised associates would have avoided. I built experience slowly, painfully, one victory and many defeats at a time. But I learned. God, did I learn. The turning point came 5 years after that reunion. IED moved from small firm to mid-size firm to a specialized litigation practice that handled complex commercial cases. I developed expertise in hospitality law, hotels, restaurants, venue liability, partly because those cases paid well and partly because something about the industry fascinated me. When the class action against Luxe Boutique Hotels landed on my firm's radar, I volunteered immediately. The case involved systematic labor violations across Victoria's hotel chain. Unpaid overtime. Misclassified employees. Wage theft through manipulated time records. Hundreds of housekeepers, servers, and maintenance workers who'd been cheated out of wages they'd legally earned. The plaintiffs were mostly immigrants, mostly women, mostly people without resources to fight back individually. The kind of people Victoria probably didn't think about at all, the people who cleaned her hotels while she attended galas celebrating her entrepreneurial success. The kind of people my mother had been her entire working life. Preparing the case revealed the full scope of Victoria's exploitation. Her hotels were beautiful. I'd seen the marketing materials, the glowing reviews, the magazine features praising her design aesthetic and hospitality vision. What the public didn't see was how that beauty was achieved, through workers paid below minimum wage, denied overtime, threatened with termination if they complained. The records my team obtained were damning. Timesheets that had been systematically altered to remove hours worked. Policies requiring employees to clock out before finishing cleaning duties. Retaliation against workers who questioned their paychecks. A pattern of exploitation so consistent it could only be deliberate. "This is one of the clearest cases of systematic wage theft I've seen," our senior partner observed during case review. "They weren't even subtle about it." "They didn't think anyone would fight back," I replied. "The workers are vulnerable. Most don't have documentation to prove their hours independently. They assumed no one would believe housekeepers over a successful businesswoman. They assumed wrong." The deposition was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. Victoria's attorneys had prepared her thoroughly, I was sure. She'd have been coached on how to answer questions, when to defer to counsel, how to project confidence while revealing nothing useful. What they couldn't have prepared her for was seeing me. I'd chosen my outfit deliberately, the $4,000 suit, the silk blouse, the shoes that cost what my first month's rent had been. Not because I needed expensive clothes to feel confident, but because I wanted Victoria to see what 5 years of work had built. I wanted her to understand that the poor relative had become something she hadn't imagined possible. Her breakdown when I entered the room was more satisfying than I'd anticipated. "That's impossible. You served potato salad, you can't be." The words tumbled out before her attorneys could stop her, before professionalism could reassert itself. For one moment, she was the girl at the reunion again, so certain of her superiority that alternative realities simply didn't compute. "I worked my way through law school while you were launching hotels," I said calmly. "I spent 5 years building expertise in exactly this area of law while you were building a business on stolen wages. Now I'm here to hold you accountable." "Victoria, don't say anything," her lead attorney interjected. "Miss Patterson, can we have a moment with our client?" "Of course. Take all the time you need." The 15-minute break extended to 45 minutes. Through the conference room's glass walls, I watched Victoria's attorneys attempting to restore her composure. She was crying, gesturing, clearly struggling with the psychological impact of facing me across a deposition table. My co-counsel, Jennifer, observed the scene with professional interest. "You know her personally?" "She's my cousin. We grew up together, more or less." "And you didn't recuse yourself?" "There's no conflict of interest. I have no financial stake in her business, no ongoing relationship that would affect my judgment." I disclosed the connection to the partners before taking the case. I paused. "My judgment is that her company exploited vulnerable workers for profit. The family relationship doesn't change that assessment. But it adds a certain satisfaction. It adds context. I know who she is. I know how she treats people she considers beneath her. That knowledge makes me more committed to this case, not less." When the deposition resumed, Victoria had regained minimal composure. Her attorneys had clearly instructed her to treat me as any other opposing counsel, professionally, neutrally, without acknowledging our personal history. She tried. She failed. Every question I asked carried weight she couldn't ignore. When I inquired about overtime policies, I saw her remembering every comment she'd made about people who worked hourly jobs. When I asked about employee classification, I saw her thinking about her dismissal of those who provided support rather than achieving. "Ms. Harrington, were you aware that your company's time tracking software was configured to automatically round down employee hours to the nearest quarter hour?" I don't handle technical details." "Were you aware that this configuration resulted in an average of 43 minutes of unpaid labor per employee per week?" "Our HR department manages those systems." "Were you aware that 43 minutes per employee, across 1,200 employees, across 3 years, amounts to approximately $2.3 million in unpaid wages?" Her attorney objected, but the damage was done. The number hung in the air, undeniable and devastating. The deposition lasted 2 days. I was thorough. Years of practice had taught me to be. Every policy decision was probed. Every justification was challenged. Every attempt to deflect responsibility was systematically dismantled. Victoria's composure deteriorated throughout. By the second day, she was barely answering questions, deferring almost everything to her attorneys, avoiding my eyes whenever possible. "One final question," I said as we concluded. "Ms. Harrington, do you consider your housekeeping staff to be valuable contributors to your company's success?" "Objection, relevance," her attorney said. "I'll allow the witness to answer if she chooses," the court reporter noted. Victoria looked at me for the first time in hours. "Of course they're valuable," she said, her voice barely audible. "Everyone who works for Lux is valuable. Then why did your company systematically steal their wages for 3 years? Objection. Withdrawn. I have nothing further. The settlement negotiations began 2 weeks later. Victoria's attorneys had reviewed the evidence and apparently convinced her that trial would be catastrophic. The documentation was too clear, the pattern too consistent, the plaintiff's stories too compelling. They offered $5 million. I countered with $15 million. They came up to $8 million. I held at $14 million, presenting additional evidence of Victoria's personal involvement in the policies that enabled wage theft. The final settlement was $12.4 million, distributed among 1,247 current and former employees who been cheated out of wages they earned. The average payout was just under $10,000 per plaintiff. For people who'd been making minimum wage, that represented months of income they'd been denied. The family learned about the case through media coverage. Luxury hotel heiress settles wage theft class action for $12.4 million. The headlines were everywhere: business publications, local news, industry outlets. Victoria's carefully cultivated image as a visionary entrepreneur was reframed as a cautionary tale about exploitation. My mother called the day the settlement was announced. Victoria's name is all over the news. Something about labor violations? I know. I was the attorney for the workers she was cheating. Silence on the line. You sued Victoria? I represented people Victoria's company exploited. The lawsuit was against the corporation, but she was the controlling shareholder and the one who set the policies. But she's family. She stole wages from housekeepers and servers who couldn't fight back. Many of them are immigrants. Many of them have families to support. She treated them like their labor wasn't worth paying for. I paused. You cleaned houses for 15 years, Mom. You know what that work is like. You know what it means when someone doesn't pay you what you're owed. My mother was quiet for a long moment. I remember when employers shorted my hours, she finally said. I remember being afraid to complain because I needed the job. That's what Victoria's workers faced. Except she did it systematically, to over 1,000 people, for 3 years. Then you did the right thing. The family reunion that year was notably different. Victoria didn't attend, prior commitments, was the official excuse. Her mother, Aunt Margaret, was present but avoided me entirely. The usual hierarchy had been disrupted, and no one was quite sure how to behave. I didn't serve potato salad this time. I saw your name in the papers, Uncle Richard said, approaching me with an expression somewhere between curiosity and wariness. That hotel case? You were the one who, I represented the plaintiffs. Yes. Victoria lost a lot of money. A lot of reputation. Victoria stole money from workers for 3 years. The settlement was accountability, not loss. He considered this. You've done well for yourself. Law school, partner track at your firm, none of that was handed to me. I kept my voice level. I worked 60-hour weeks while living in studio apartments and eating ramen. I built my career without family connections or financial support. Everything I have, I earned. I didn't mean to suggest. I know what you meant. The same thing Victoria meant when she said some of us were born to succeed and some to watch. I smiled slightly. Turns out she was wrong about which was which. Victoria requested a meeting 6 months after the settlement. I agreed, curious what she could possibly want to say. We met at a coffee shop, neutral territory, public space, no attorneys present. She looked older than I remembered. The stress of the lawsuit, the settlement, the public humiliation, it had taken a visible toll. I want to understand something, she said without preamble. Did you take that case because of what I said at the reunion? I took that case because your company was exploiting vulnerable workers. The fact that you owned it was additional motivation. So it was revenge. It was justice. Your workers deserved compensation for stolen wages. The fact that holding you accountable also felt satisfying doesn't change the legitimacy of their claims. You could have recused yourself. Let someone else handle it. I could have. But I was the most qualified attorney at my firm for this specific type of case. Stepping aside would have meant giving your workers less effective representation because I was too uncomfortable facing family. Victoria stirred her coffee without drinking it. I've thought a lot about what I said. At the reunion. About some people being born to succeed. And I was wrong. Obviously. You succeeded despite every disadvantage I had as an advantage. You built a career while I built a business on other people's labor and pretended I earned everything myself. Is this an apology? I don't know if apology covers it. I spent our entire childhood treating you like you were less than me because your family had less money. I said cruel things because I knew you couldn't fight back. And then you became someone who could fight back, and you did. The conversation lasted 2 hours. Victoria talked about her business, her choices, the culture she'd created that enabled the exploitation. She wasn't making excuses, she was processing, trying to understand how she becomes someone who could systematically cheat workers while congratulating herself on her success. I told myself it was just business, she said. Everyone in the industry cuts corners on labor costs. I wasn't doing anything unusual. That doesn't make it right. I know. I know that now. She finally drank her cold coffee. The worst part is realizing that the people I exploited were doing the same kind of work your mother did. Cleaning. Serving. The jobs that people like me pretend don't require skill or deserve respect. My mother worked harder than anyone I know. She never complained about the work, she complained about employers who treated her like she was disposable. I was one of those employers. To over 1,000 people. Yes. You were. I didn't forgive Victoria that day. Forgiveness requires more than acknowledgement, it requires changed behavior sustained over time. One conversation, however honest, couldn't undo years of cruelty or the systematic exploitation of vulnerable workers. But I accepted that she was trying to understand. That she was capable of growth, even if the growth had been forced by consequences rather than chosen voluntarily. We're not close now. We never will be. The history between us is too weighted, the power dynamics too fraught. But we can be in the same room without tension. We can acknowledge each other as equals, not because she's accepted my success, but because I no longer need her acceptance. The workers who received settlements used the money in different ways. Some paid off debts. Some sent children to school. Some returned to countries they'd left, finally able to afford the journey. Some started small businesses of their own. One plaintiff, a housekeeper named Maria who'd worked for Lux for 7 years, used her settlement to bring her mother to the United States. I couldn't afford the paperwork before, she told me. 7 years of working, and I could never save enough. Your case gave me my mother back. That was worth more than any satisfaction I'd felt watching Victoria cry. She told me some people were born to succeed and some to watch. She said it while wearing a dress that cost my monthly salary, while I served potato salad at a family reunion. I smiled because crying would have given her satisfaction. Then I spent 5 years building a career she couldn't imagine. When her hotel chain faced a class action lawsuit for stealing wages from housekeepers and servers, I walked into the deposition room as lead counsel for the plaintiffs. The cousin who dismissed me as the poor relative discovered I become the attorney fighting for workers she exploited. The settlement was $12.4 million. The workers got justice. Victoria got consequences. And I got proof that some of us weren't born to watch, we were just waiting for the right moment to act.